So, Rob Brand Straten, CEO of Skytree, thank you so much for joining me on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
My pleasure to be here, Harry.
So, where are you dialing in from? I always say dialing in, even though it's not a phone call. I don't know, it's force of habit. But I grew up in the 80s when people still used actual phones. So,
Well, I remember those days, Harry. I'm comfortably at home here in a city called Hilversum, which is 20 kilometers away from Amsterdam, where our office is.
so for the benefit of the listener, we're planning on getting some of these now onto video, but a lot of people consume this on audio. So they don't have the pleasure of the face-to-face interaction that we're having right now. And I can't help but notice you've got some very interesting artwork on your
Oh,
walls.
wow.
And yeah,
Wait, you see this?
wow.
And
What,
this
yeah,
is
that's,
made by a Polish female artist. And the blue fish, that's me.
oh, wow. That's beautiful.
It is, yeah. I enjoyed it.
Are you a connoisseur, a collector, a fan of art?
I just like art, painted art, modern art, but also the old masters. I had the pleasure of being at Vermeer, the recent exhibition, world famous, as all the Vermeer paintings were brought together in the Rijksmuseum here. So it's just great to see how people like 100 years ago, with the limitations of what was available to them, were able to create such magnificent pictures that actually show how people lived at the time. And Vermeer is one of the greatest, I would say.
I was in Amsterdam probably a long time ago, but I did at Rijksmuseum is in Amsterdam. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I did make it there. I think it was probably in late '90s now. So I'm dating myself, but I was lucky enough to take an arts and ideas class when I first went to college and university, and I didn't know. And I was immediately drawn into just the world of all the artists, a lot of Dutch, very famous Dutch artists with a lot of history. And so it was very interesting to just learn a lot. And I really appreciate the ability to appreciate art more. And then when you see it on a book, and then you have the ability to go into the museum and see, Starry Night and Rembrandt and in person, Michelangelo's David, like in person, you see, you have all these experiences. It just completely enhances your appreciation for it once you've done a bit of background and you know like the background and the story of all these artists.
Yeah, and the story of the paintings, there are often amazing stories behind these paintings, who bought them, where they went, and what was painted over because they didn't like certain elements in the painting. Those are the
That's
stories
right.
of painting.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious about your experience, and you've had leadership positions in many companies as I was looking at your CV. And I'm wondering, as you were thinking, I'm going to have you rewind the clock a little bit, but as you're thinking about coming out of university, what you're thinking about, if you can put yourself in that mindset of those youthful days, of your aspirations, of what you were, planning to do, where you were looking to move, and what you were thinking about a career at that point.
Oh, I wasn't thinking about a career at all at those days.
Most of us are not.
No, and my journey wasn't maybe a little bit atypical as I first served in the army. And then I was a sailor for a couple of years, wandering around the world. And then the last thing you do is think about a career. So, but when I met this beautiful young lady, I decided to stop with the sailing and started to look for a job. And in those days, it was a little bit different. You couldn't go to job sites and the like. You had to go to a bureau and work your way through to little cards and cards that were there. And then, as a sort of maybe even a coincidence, I went into technology first as a software developer. I'm educated as a software developer and a system analyst. But then, soon I discovered that writing code wasn't my thing. So I went into sales. And then, from sales, being a team leader, then the team got bigger, a level higher, and soon I became a business unit manager, a business manager running companies, and it sort of happened to me. It wasn't like I had this career path.
Yeah, that's the way life usually goes. Is there one story from your days sailing that is memorable that you can remember? For you?
Oh, many, many
I'm sure you have
stories
many.
sharing. But yeah, so I was at a tanker, a small tanker, not an oil tanker, but we transported dangerous fluids, chemicals, and other stuff. And So that brought us to areas in the world where these products were made. And that's not the Western world.
Yeah.
You get them from very poor countries and then you sell them to the Western countries where they're used in industrial processing. So that brought me to extreme poor areas in the world. And that really opened my eyes and, made me conscious of how this world works and how fortunate I am being born in the country where I live.
Yeah, I think it happens to many of us, especially if we've got, nice households that we grow up in, or we grow up in a first world country. And I think everyone's first experience with a third world country, is really shocking and jarring. And I think it sounds like that's what happened to you. And I remember those experiences as well. Like the realization that we're on a planet that we're all using the same resources and it's a limited supply of resources. And I think when we're in our own bubbles, we lose sight. We only focus on what we need for ourselves to get through the day. And I think it's happening more and more now. I feel hopeful. We've gone through cycles and we'll talk about that as well. But I think that awareness, and do you see that's what was happening for you, sort of like an awakening to, this idea that we're part of a bigger planet and a bigger ecosystem?
Yeah, it's easy to say that now when I look back. So, but those were defining experiences. And then it built up when I was running my own first companies. You start to wonder around bookkeeping. So we express value in euros or dollars, right? And then I read about the Treaty of Rome or the Declaration of Rome, where it was explained that, well, you use things that you don't account for, but that have a price, and somebody will pay the price in the future. And that made an impression on me long before the years of, environmental understanding or when it
Yeah.
became like more almost fashionable. So, but I was always convinced that there's something wrong in the way we value things we produce or things we make because we don't count in all the costs.
That's important. So, as you were making your way through your career, which was the first position where you held the role of CEO?
That was quite a while back. That was, I've been CEO a couple of times. Smaller IT focused companies in the
Yeah.
time that we were building the internet. We
Okay.
were delivering the building blocks for the internet at internet service providers, as they were called at the time. So that was our own first business. We started with five. I sold it off 5 years later when we were with 100. And I did that once more, internet security. And later, I was CEO within a 25,000 people company. And then I was CEO of like 1,000 people business unit, running my own P&L, but not being like, the overall CEO. I had
Yeah.
CEO business card though. But then I was just running businesses and services, but not like the overall CEO position, so not accountable for the finance or the investor relations until recently at Skytree. And I came back in the hot seat, as we say.
Those early days of the internet are always fascinating to me because I remember, the dot-com days, everything seemed like this world of possibility. I remember the first time I discovered the internet, that there's something beyond AOL, and you're like peeking behind the curtain. It was like, whoa, what's this?
Well,
Do
people couldn't imagine that you would read a newspaper on your computer, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then the iPhone came. And I've been reading science fiction books in my younger years when people had devices that they can talk to each other and also see each other. It was crazy, man. Look at where we are now.
I think almost everything that's in Star Trek has now come to pass.
Yeah.
Do you remember your very first computer?
Yeah. I think that was a Commodore
Commodore.
64.
Commodore
Commodore?
64.
Yeah. I had to think for a few seconds. I think it was a Commodore. I'm pretty sure now it was a Commodore 64.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I remember those early days, like the Atari 2600 days, the Texas Instruments, and then later on, I think that was the first one, or maybe, and then eventually moved into Gateway. But it was just a fascinating time. People were just watching like the processor speeds going from like 86 to 286, 3. That was the big deal, like back then.
Yeah. I think it was called Moore's Law. I
Moore's
remember
Law,
my
yeah.
frame. That wasn't at a Commodore 64. That was on an IBM mainframe. I think it was a 3080, if I remember well. I was working at a bank in the
Okay. Was that punch cards or the big floppy disks?
Yeah, no, no, we were switching from the punch cards at the time, and we were playing moon landing.
Oh
You
wow.
know, you didn't have a screen to see you actually land on the moon. You had like this print output, with the feedback of the data you entered. But yeah, long time ago. Yeah.
Super early days. So as you were moving through your leadership roles, when did you start becoming aware of environmental issues? Because I know before Skytree, you did some work with EV Box, I think it was, and also just kind of this understanding of the impact that industry and people were having on the environment.
Yeah, so environment, was a bit bigger for me as I've seen or I worked at E, S, and G, starting at Good Governance, the Dutch company that was creating enterprise software for large companies to help them, first of all, to have solid accounts under Sarbanes-Oxley after the Enron debacle, and then the SOX, as we called it, the SOX controls needed to be automated, and then we added risks. So risk management became part of those type of software platforms, and then compliance came. And then I remember we were taken over by Nasdaq at the time. I spent a lot of time in with US customers as well. And then the team became, we sort of had as thought leadership, and I shared with many audiences around the world. Do you have to comply or should you wish to comply? And then compliance became broader as elements were pulled in, like modern slavery or sexual harassment on the workplace and things of that nature. So and then compliance became bigger as companies increasingly needed to behave in a responsible way, not only dictated by law, but dictated by their customers, because reputational risk became
Yeah.
the lead risk. So I moved into those type of topics. We also had another company I worked. We had a big education arm. We educated millions of people in large companies how to behave when you want to comply to laws, whether it's anti-bribery or child labor or any of these things, conflict minerals, or just to behave in the way that you should because you want to and your customers want you to. So that was my first experience. Then I went, that included G and S. And then I went into environmental by joining a large manufacturer of EV charging equipment and software to support the electrification of transport. And all those roles were global roles. So I'm comfortable at the global stage. And all those roles had one thing in common next to the ESG focus, and that is extreme fast growth.
That makes sense. I'm curious when you start to have conversations with companies that are old companies that have historically, not had concern for the environment. You've seen a lot of the stories here in the United States, and I'm sure it's global. And I think it just becomes almost like an awareness and this idea of like when you know better, do better. And so, were you encountering in those early conversations a lot of resistance to people in terms of knowing that they had to change, or through your education, were you opening people up to say, hey, there's a better way of doing things? And then when they see that way, they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. Maybe we should move in this direction.
I think the first step is exactly as you said, sort of nodding yes, a few people in the audience, and then more people, and then people, admitting that they should do something. But then it's not easy to change, specifically if you're not in a big company. And as we always said in risk management, I think that goes for all these ESG related topics. It starts with the tone at the top. And then the tone needs to convert in being real about it. And we
Yeah.
all know greenwashing is sort of an intermediate stage between
Hmm.
awareness and really doing things. Oh, let's say we do this. We can defend that with a little bit of fantasy, and you can criticize it, but it's also a step in
Yeah.
the right direction,
Yeah.
right? And then public outcry on greenwashing will repair that soon because that's the worst thing that can happen to your reputation.
Yeah.
So now I think increasingly people want to comply with good behavior as well as rules and regulations. And there's something else going on, and there's no choice. But it's difficult because of our climate issue, and there's
Yeah.
no choice anymore. But the difficulty is always that it's easy to talk about what we should do, and it's difficult to change your own behavior.
Yeah.
But increasingly, we see recognition that actually the world will survive, the planet will survive, but it's people that will be in trouble.
Yeah. Very good point. Very well said. So take us back to the moment when you started coming up with the idea for Skytree. Who else was involved? And share with us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so well, I have to apologize because Skytree is not my idea. I did. I'm not the founder of the company, Ari.
Yeah.
So, but I'll tell you quickly how Skytree came about and then how I got connected to it.
Sure.
So, Skytree originally is a spin off of the European Space Agency, where there was the International Space Station. And one of the problems to keep the astronauts alive was to take out the CO2. Because you know what happens with people if there's too much CO2 build up
Yeah.
in an area and you breathe, so you produce CO2. So, and this piece of technology was called the CO2 scrubber. And the engineer that worked on that, he started Skytree back in the days with through an incubator program of the European Space Agency. They got a little bit of money. They were young. They didn't need a lot of money, so they strapped away. They tried. No, I should say they brought the technology from space to terrestrial conditions. Now, imagine in space, you have vacuum, so you can move around gases. You don't have weight. That makes it easy to build a big machine. You have space, unlimited space in space, and unlimited funds from the European Space Agency.
That's true. Yeah.
Now you bring it to terrestrial conditions, you have to solve all four. And that took, I think, 4 or 5 years. And then the first DAC unit, direct air capture unit, was built. It was the size of a book and it did a few grams of CO2 per day. And then they started to look, okay, so what can we do with it? And then they come up, well, maybe we can sell it to people that own an aquarium so that they can bubble the CO2 in the water. And obviously, you can't build a business on that. So they went looking for other use cases. And then, after investigating this and that, they put their eyes on electric vehicles. And then the thought was, okay, let's build a little bit bigger system that fits in the car. And if you take out the CO2 from a car cabin, similar to a space cabin, then you don't need to get new air from outside.
Yeah.
Because you know, when you drive in a car, you feel drizzly. No, how do you say that?
Drowsy.
Drowsy.
Yeah.
Thank you. You know, we say, "Oh, I need oxygen," but actually, you need less CO2 in
Yeah.
the air.
Good point.
That's what's causing the drowsiness. So you have to take in air from outside, right? But then, when you take air from outside, you have to cool it or heat it, which costs a lot of energy, up to 30% of the battery of an electric vehicle. So
Mm,
hot or cold conditions, you could extend your range by 17%. And Skytree created these little devices that were tested in many cars, and many car makers wanted to be involved, and they gave funds to Skytree as a sort of R&D extension to continue to develop this technology until the end of 2021, when I was connected with Max Beaumont, the founder, the engineer that started the company. And he asked me for advice as I was working in the EV charging industry. So, well, I told him, you're in a dead end street. No car maker will ever buy a Filter Max because you know they will not move for the next couple of years because they're afraid for accidents that will happen with the CO2. Somebody dies, maybe regulations first need to change, and then if they want to buy these small filters, they won't buy it from you
yeah.
because a super big elephant won't buy these critical devices from the mouse. The Skytree were with 8 people at the time. And he said, "Yeah, I kind of know this, but I needed somebody to shout it in my ear." He also had, you know, another device that he's built years before, and he said, "Well, you know, instead of taking it out of the car and blowing it in the air, we can also take it out of the air and blow it in somewhere else. For
Mm,
instance, in a container farm, because in a container farm you have a closed environment." and you need to supplement CO2 to make sure the plants grow. Visual daylight in the closed environment. And he said we could develop that machine, right, and then sell it to people that have a container farm. I said, yeah, for sure. But then you can't build a business on that, right? Because there's only so many containers. And you need a lot of funds to build this machine in volume. So, but what if you buy machines that do 5, 10 kilos a day, or maybe 200 kilos a day, and you make them stackable? Then you have a global market that
Hmm.
you do. And Max said, yeah, that's a great idea, and we should. But then, this is the very short version, but then the conclusion was that I should be the CEO, as he didn't have a clue how to build a company that could do that. So we're still dear friends, but I came in as CEO of Skytree, unofficial for a couple of months. And then 1st of April last year, 2022, I was formally appointed as CEO, became a tiny shareholder as well.
Yeah.
And we started to grow until the Skytree that we're here with today.
Rob, what was it about your conversation with Max, you said? Yeah.
Max Beaumont.
As he's describing it, and you can see and probably feel his enthusiasm for the potential for what this could become. I imagine you give a lot of thought when taking over a role, and especially one that's so prominent and visible like CEO. So, what did you see in terms of the potential for the technology that was the turning point for you to make that decision?
Yeah, what I liked about Skytree and the value I saw was that they actually had 5 working prototypes. And, there's a lot of plans, there's a lot of publications, but there's not a lot of companies who are sort of advanced with their technology. That's only a handful in the world. And Skytree was already at that point. It never had any strategy to industrialize it, right? And to build an organization that can bring that successfully to the market and then service it and build channels and what have you. So I thought, well, that's the easy part. That's what I do. But the technology was there. It was supported by, I think it was 15 patents at the time. There was this small group of great scientists, PhDs, chemists, mostly women, by the way. And I just saw the opportunity, and maybe that blindsided me a little bit for the risk.
Yeah.
Then, yeah, I mean, you dive into it because you think, it's a gut feel. We can make this work.
And so, fast forward to present day, you recently raised your, was it the seed or A at you $6 million?
Seed of
Yeah.
6 million is still pre-revenue. We will be announcing a Series A in a couple of weeks from now. And that's the only letter that we want to see in fundraising. So we should be cash positive after the next round. And yeah, I mean, that was great as our lead and co-lead investor come from the agritech environment. So our lead investor is a Dutch firm called Horticoop. They are collectively owned by 400 Dutch greenhouses. So that's the next market we will enter into after vertical farming. And then the co-lead was the Yield Lab, also agri-tech early stage investor. And they clearly recognized the value that we could bring to the sector. And they've got an excellent network, including hundreds of potential clients. So that was a great round. And I think, the next round, we will be looking more at bigger VCs, potentially also in the US.
Okay. Congratulations on that, because I know in this environment it's not an easy task to do.
A lot of hard work, I can tell you.
So we've been talking a lot about the origin company of the company. And, for many folks, this may be their first engagement with Skytree. I saw that you had a table at Indoor AgTech NYC. I didn't get a chance to connect with the team, but I saw that and I was like, oh, I'm looking forward to my conversation with Rob coming up soon. So is that going to be part of the outreach, a bit of the outreach strategy to just make more of an appearance at some of these indoor farming shows?
Yeah, that's spot on, Harry. Until a few weeks back, we operated in what we call stealth mode. So we had this not so super clear website, and we didn't have any materials to share, and so we've been preparing that behind the scenes. And a couple of weeks back, we launched our new website, and we started to attend conferences, speaking at conferences, exhibitions, being out there connecting to potential clients. I was interviewed by TechCrunch, which Was nice article, by the way, with the editor Tim. And then we sent out a press release on our successful closing of the funding round. And that all happened in 1 week. And then in that same week, we were at the Green Tech. And the Green Tech is often referred to as the Controlled Environment Agriculture Innovation Conference and Exhibition. Over 500 exhibitors there, very international, right here in Amsterdam. And we won the Concept and Innovation Award. So that was really the icing on the cake. I mean, since then, it's been busy
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
good.
I imagine. That's great. Yeah, I'm definitely noticing more and more visibility for the company, especially in the news. I know iGrow featured you as well. So, for the listeners that are new to this technology to understand the benefits, who is an ideal client for Skytree? And in terms of, and maybe you can explain some of the different ways farms or anyone who could be a potential client could think about how to apply this in their environment.
Yeah, so our beachhead market, as we call it, is vertical farming, which will be followed by greenhouses. The difference is vertical farming is more closed than a greenhouse, and in vertical farming, we have artificial daylight. But in most greenhouses and almost all vertical farms, CO2 is supplemented to the growth area to stimulate plant growth, often a need to have, sometimes a nice to have. And currently, all that supply of CO2 is coming from CO2 that's captured in an exhaust of a large industrial facility, oil refinery, fertilizer plant. So it feels like that's a good thing, right? So the CO2 is not emitted, the CO2 is captured and then used in a vertical farm. But if you think of it, so the CO2 is not emitted to the atmosphere. Okay, that's a good start. Then it's captured. The capturing costs energy. There are machines that capture that CO2 that have been made, manufactured, which is a carbon footprint. Then the CO2 is a bit toxic, so it has to be cleaned and purified. Then it has to be liquefied. Then it has to be loaded on a truck, and the truck will bring it to the vertical farm. And what I found in my conversations with vertical farms who want to be very sustainable and are good people is that they use the worst emissions that there are, directly from an oil company,
Yeah.
and then added CO2 molecules on the way until it goes into the plants and through the plants and people, it comes in the atmosphere. So these are postponed emissions. And when you make people aware in vertical farming, they often say, "You're right," or "I never thought about it," or "But what's the alternative?" And what we do is we provide a machine that you can put on site next to your farm that takes the CO2 out of the ambient air right there at the location as an alternative supply. That CO2 will come back in the atmosphere, of course, but now it's not emissions anymore. Now it's a circular CO2 supply.
How much of this is an education process for vertical farms, or do you feel like most owners and operators understand the concepts and then are seeing this as a great opportunity to do their part for the environment as well?
There are two topics that are immediately coming up in any conversation. One is pleasant. People are pleasantly surprised. They say, "Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I should switch, right?" And then quickly it comes to, "And what are the costs?"
Yeah.
So, and to help people understanding their current costs, we usually ask a few questions like, "What are you paying currently for your CO2?" Well, I pay 50 cents, $1, up to $8 in remote areas. And then they ask us, "And what do we pay for a kilo CO2 with you?" And then we say, "Well, first, is that all you pay? If you look at your invoice, oh, yeah, no, you're right. No, we need to rent a tank or we need to rent
Uh,
a cylinder. Oh, we pay for the transport as well. Okay, so what's your real price?" Okay, so the real price is there. And then how we answer our price per kilogram CO2, we say, we don't sell CO2. We sell you a machine and you generate your own CO2 and you take it from the air. So it depends on your years of machine depreciation in your P&L, what your price per kg is. But you should think differently. But hey, if you want to calculate it back to a price per kilogram, here's a nice little tool. Fill in your data, and then it calculates your price per kilogram CO2 based on the values you put in, what you currently pay, your length of depreciation, and all those good things. That is your data. We just sell you the machine.
Yeah, what I've seen with services like this is providing people with the tools to educate themselves, calculators to figure out the real cost for these, because there's a lot of numbers tossed around in this industry about benefits and, coming back to the greenwashing as well. So, I think a lot more companies are being careful about what they promise in terms of, and as opposed to, what's being delivered.
100%. And that's really in the culture of Skytree. We're very down to earth people here, a lot of very smart and young people. They're truly purpose driven, so they wouldn't feel comfortable if we would take the marketing route. But we're not, yeah, we're business people as well. So we need to sell our equipment. So we provide like these little instruments, like we call it the TCO tool, total cost of ownership, that we just spoke about. And the other tool that we're soon introducing is the carbon footprint tool. So you can fill in your current supply chain. You get our data, our LCA life cycle analysis data, and ours is scientific referenced and backed. It's made by scientists, not by salespeople. So people, the carbon gain, if they would switch from their current fossil fuel-based CO2 supply to taking CO2 from the ambient air, what would it do for their carbon footprint? So we help them with that.
Obviously, for some folks, it's a lot of education process. So are you getting good conversations and the feedback from your team in these conferences as people come to the booth and they learn more about what Skytree does?
It's very positive. It's like a warm bath. Every conversation we have, people understand. You just need to make them aware, as we just spoke about. And increasingly, people are aware. So they approach us, and because they've heard about us or seen it. And it's almost, if you pay less per kilogram CO2, if you improve your carbon footprint, and you don't have to order these cylinders anymore and offload them and connect them, so it's more convenient, there's no reason to not switch to a product.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Talk a little bit about the roadmap. I'm sure some of this stuff, you'll have to release when it's ready for public consumption. But what can you talk about in terms of what you have planned for, everything moves so fast in this industry. So I'll just have you go out maybe 6 months, to a year. What are you thinking?
Yeah, a year is a long time, but 6 months we have visibility on.
Yeah, 6 months.
Yeah, in a couple of months, we will open shop, as we say. We will start selling as we're ready for it and process purchase orders for our 10 kilogram a day unit. You can stack them if you need 20 or 30. Then we will start delivering from volume production at the end of this year. And there's healthy appetite from both vertical farms as well as the turnkey providers to vertical farms. And some of the leading companies there will integrate Skytree units in their farm concepts instead of designing it to take these metal cylinders that we were talking about.
That makes a lot of sense. So I asked this question, and I always get a different answer depending on where the company is in the moment. But what is a tough question you have had to ask yourself recently?
Well, what the hell I was doing here when we met another roadblock. When we look back, we always laugh about it and we became more confident. But we had like these 6 or 7 roadblocks. We call it, the filter lifetime panic or the ammonia crisis. We all gave it names. And then, we do simulations, build prototypes and pilot units. And then we come across a new roadblock that we didn't see coming. And then sometimes, you get a little bit desperate. And my wife knows. She knows when there's something
Oh,
wrong.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
So then I have to confess.
You can't hide it.
Yeah. And then, a couple of weeks later, you can announce that this is another hurdle we took. So for the Model 10 that we're introducing, all roadblocks have been jumped over. So we're moving to production. And there's a bigger model, and then the journey will start again.
Yeah, you have to come up with more creative names for those roadblocks when they happen. Rob, when you think about your journey and everything that all the paths you've taken to get you where you are today and in this position with this initiative, doing this work, Hindsight is 2020, obviously, but why do you think you're here, and what motivates you like to be here now doing this work?
So, first and foremost, it's the value that I can bring with all my experience to a company that I consider as an important company. Our next step in the journey is to go into, other use cases that are also super important, like production of protein or green hydrogen, or to contribute technology to all these removal projects that are now all inventing the wheel. So we will, in my vision, supply technology to all those projects as well. So I feel that it's important and therefore rewarding if you can contribute from what you're good at. So I'm not a CEO who wants to do everything that I also can do. I want to do the things that I'm good at. And those are based on, experience and ability to inspire people, help people. So we're a very kind environment to work in. We've got 50 full-time employees with a one-on-one gender balance, a lot of nationalities here.
Yeah,
People are not working until 11 at night.
yeah. They want to
That's not,
burn people out.
we are not burning people out. And I'm just proud to contribute and, get the reward of through the results, but also, to create an excellent work environment
Yeah,
for the people that work here. So, so we don't advertise the great things we do in our company, like our gender balance, because I think that's not what we should do. Not use it in marketing, but in a more sincere way.
yeah.
And my next step in my journey after I hand over the helm to somebody else is to help other companies to also be good companies. Because I want to be responsible for building the company how companies should be. We're back to the beginning of our conversation.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that insight. I always like to leave a little bit of room at the end of these conversations because of the people and the audience that are listening. It's a lot of your peers, your colleagues in the space, the other founders and CEOs. What message, knowing that this is a audience of indoor farming enthusiasts and champions, any thoughts come to mind for a message you have for the vertical farming industry?
Yeah, I think I have one. There's similarity in the vertical farming industry and the segment that I operate in, direct air capture companies. And the similarity is like there's a lot of initiatives that want to operate and want to develop technology. And although, that's a logic thing to do in an immature industry, when an industry matures, then you will see a split into people that are great operators and people that are great in tech development. And not every vertical farm can develop the best tech in the world,
Correct.
right? So there has to be more sharing of technology. And there's a lot of similarity in what we do and in vertical farming. But that's hang in there. That's just, the next level of maturity. But unless you have your tech really under control, focus on being a great operator, understanding your customers and all those good things, making sure you have excellent products at an acceptable price. And where you're a tech developer, don't do operations. Leave the operations to operators and work with them, to distribute your tech as widely as possible to drive down costs. So without wanting to give somebody an advice what to do, it's just a normal pattern what's happening in the vertical farming industry on
Mm-hmm.
its next level of maturity. And that cycle is just starting exactly in the same way in the industry that I'm currently in. And it happened in all industries or many industries.
I think that's an incredibly helpful perspective and a great way to put a sort of a ribbon on this part of our conversation, because I feel there's going to be other opportunities that are coming up to talk and see what's happening. But I think, especially for new people coming in, I think they see the closings of some of these big name farms or the restructuring, and they get a little nervous about the industry. And I think it's helpful to have the perspective of someone who's been in various industries, held leadership roles in various industries, has seen these cycles, boom and bust cycles. And so I think giving people, reminding them to take in a deep breath, relax. It's
Yeah.
going to be, we're headed on the right path. There's going to be bumps along the way, but I think, to have faith that we're all moving towards it in the same direction.
Couldn't agree more.
So the site is skytree.eu, and we'll make sure all the links that your team provided, we'll put them in the show notes for the listener as well. Anywhere else you want to send the listener to connect with you and the team?
No, a website is a good
Okay.
start.
Okay, so we'll make sure we share that because there's a lot of good details there about the technology. It's a beautiful site, a lot of good visuals about how the technology works. So it's very impressive, and I think people will learn a
Also,
lot.
I will pass on the compliment to Estee Scheikin, who's our chief marketing officer. She's awesome, by the way. And thinking of her, she will hate me if I don't share with you that we participate in Cultivate.
Okay,
When it's in 2 weeks' time, we're there. Our US team is there.
okay.
So I'm glad I said that.
She'll appreciate that. Rob, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed getting to hear your story. It's very inspirational, and I love to see all the different ways that people are participating in this industry. So I appreciate you and your time.
Likewise, Harry. It was a pleasure talking to you.